Hi, friends. Welcome to Torah Saturday. My camera is not working today, so you're just going to have a voice, a bot cold, kind of a loud voice, mysterious, coming from the ether as we discuss this. But I will be able to share. And we are looking at a section from one of the last two Torah portions of the book of Leviticus. It is called Behar and the Mountain. This whole book basically is a continuation of what Moses was telling the Israelites at Mount Sinai. So there's a lot of laws. The scholars attribute the authorship of this book to who they call the priestly author. It's a lot of things that have to do with laws and holiness and sacrifices. So we'll start with the blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
So,
Amen.
All right, so let me get things set up here on the right page. So I put together a source sheet, and it is an interesting verse in Leviticus. We're going to be looking mostly at 25:35 and a little bit at 25:36. So would
25,
someone like to unmute and
30,
read the section?
25.
25:35.
Okay. Oh, this is a little different than mine. So
Ah,
much.
well, Marty,
Yeah.
do you want to read what's
If
here
your
and then
kinsman, yeah.
what's
If
yours
if
say,
your
Amy?
kin being in straits come under your authority and are held by you as though resident aliens, let them live by your side.
There's a lot of ways to translate this, and that's one of the things we're going to be looking at. I'm curious, what does your book say?
If your kinsman being in straits comes under your authority and you hold them as though a resident alien, let them live by your side. Not too different, but
Not too
this is a
different.
little more contemporary. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what is this kind of, let's just look at the plain meaning of this and see how we can sort this out. What is going on here?
Well, there's tolerance that's being spoken of. I guess aliens are treated well in general, and now this is saying that your your fellow Israelites who are experiencing hard times shall be treated as well as those sojourners. They're also called?
Sojourners is one of the words. Yeah, there's a couple words we're going to dig into here. Um, the Hebrew is ger v'toshav. So ger, that's a word that we may have heard. It's often thought of as a convert. It could also be like a stranger, another person from another, as another religion, but's living with you in the community. And then toshav, that's someone who's, well, we'll see what Rashi has to say, because that's kind of one of the first things that started looking at. Hey, good morning, Diane.
Hi.
Marty, do you want to read this Rashi's comment here? Ger
Okay.
v'toshav.
Garvetoshav means even though he be a stranger or a sojourner. And don't know what is a toshav? One who has undertaken not to worship idols, i.e., one who has been converted to the fundamental tenet of Judaism, but eats carrion, does not care for the other commandments of the Torah.
Right. So this is there's sort of the Rashi from the Midrash Sifra is defining a ger as someone who's a full convert, and the other one someone who's basically a monotheist, but still doesn't keep kosher. You know, we'll eat lobster and we'll eat pork and that sort of stuff. Um, so to me, it's not entirely clear what is being asked here. Um, ahicha, that is your brother, often meant to be community, but like we see the same thing in the Cain and Abel story. You know, where is your brother, ahicha, and or dam ve'achicha, your brother's bloods cry out. So it's a close relative or community member. Yamuch, that is often considered becoming poor. So if someone's kind of fallen on hard financial times, um, let's. There's the second sentence about don't charge them interest, but we'll come back to that. So let's look at the first sentence by Rashi. Would someone like to read this one?
Well, I'll continue. Thou shalt relieve him. Do not leave him by himself so that he comes down in the world until he finally falls altogether, when it will be difficult to give him a lift, but uphold him from the very moment of the failure of his means. To what may the differences between whether you assist him at once or whether you wait with your help until he has come down in the world, be compared to an excessive load on the back of an ass. So long as it is still on the ass's back, one person is enough to take hold of it and to keep it up. As soon as it has fallen to the ground, not even 5 persons are able to set it on its legs.
Okay, so somebody they've lost their job. They're hitting some financial straits. Yeah, maybe it's a relative. So what are we expected to do then? What is this um, analogy with the ass bearing a load? What is that saying?
Don't wait until he's completely broken or the situation gets more extreme to where it's much more difficult, if not impossible, to recover. But jump in there and help right away.
Yeah, well said, Marty. Yeah, don't wait until they lose their house. Don't wait until they're living on the street in order to step in, because once they get to that space, it's much harder to kind of get them back on their feet. Whereas if you can, um, I'm really not used to I'm sort of holding my hand up like I'm holding on to a handle. If you could just kind of steady them before they fall, it's a lot less work and a lot less effort.
Yeah. My, my, my commentary on this section, it says that they emphasize the importance of letting those who have either lost their land or lost their means to live as part of the community and not be demeaned, but to
Mhm.
have some kind of a role, continue to have some kind of role in the community. Where they talk about residing, where it talks about the alien part, wherever that was, a resident alien.
Resident
Let
alien.
him live by your side. That's how they were interpreting that part. It's not enough just to, you know, catch them before they fall type thing, but to try to make it help people maintain their dignity
Mhm.
and their purpose.
Thank you, Nita. That's a really important point. Who is that? Does it say who that commentator was?
Um, no,
Okay.
this this copy isn't good about that. I'm not seeing anything. If I find anything, I'll let you know.
Okay, I've seen that. I read a lot of the commentaries and I saw that one. So, all right. They're just kind
Yeah.
of summarizing
Yeah, this
all
is
of it.
I think this is a rather contemporary copy of the Tanaka. Okay. All right.
No, no worries. No, that's a really good person. So what do you think about that?
I have a question. Is this all in the context of the 7 year cycle that or are you supposed to follow this at all times? Uh,
So yeah, so the 7 year cycle, you're talking about this idea that you give the land the rest every 7 years, and slaves can be freed. And this section is after all of that. But I think this is independent of that. This is just how we should behave in general.
okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about that part. So we talked about this again, this thing about a Toshav who here it's like um but you'll notice there's a little bit of ambiguity because like Anita uh in what she was relating, it was sort of like you would keep them in the community. And what did it say about the resident alien, Anita?
Um, uh, let's see. It just said the person involved shouldn't be evicted from the land or, sent away from the community, but rather must be allowed to continue to reside at your side as a member of the community.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um,
So
and
here it's
then, yeah,
go ahead, go on.
that's really all it says in relation to that. And then
Okay.
it goes on, but then the next one has to do with when it moves on to 38, when it's reminding people that the land belongs to God, not us.
Got it. Okay. So, um, Rashi is like taking this idea about the sojourner and stranger from Sifra, which is one of the pieces of Midrash, a writing by rabbis from roughly the second century. So I'd just say, well, let's see what it says in the Sifra. It's pretty long section. Um, Someone want to read okay, so this is what we saw exactly before. So Rashi, who had kind of an encyclopedic memory for these things, he would pull this out. And um, then there's this bit, well, don't help them if they're doing something evil. Um, that's kind of silly. I mean, doesn't it's not a blank check. It's like, okay. And then just a little bit more detail on there. So I was curious, like where else we saw this word toshav. So there was you can actually look it up and see other references. And one of them is from Leviticus 22:10. And here the toshav, it says Kodesh toshav Kohen. So the Toshav Kohen, this is considered a hired laborer of the priest. So it's not at all about like this convert or this person who doesn't eat carrion. It's actually like a hired laborer. So it is. Um, so I'm wondering, is this maybe you kind of bring them in and you give them a job as a hired laborer within your community. Here's the
But what's interesting, Rabbi, is where it goes on to talk about a person who is a priest's property can eat of them. So if there's a distinguishing between someone who's being paid and someone who isn't.
That's right. That's right.
That's rather disturbing, but anyway.
Yeah, no, it is kind of a distinction. There's something distinctive. It's a separate class of person. It's not a slave.
Yeah, right.
It's not a convert, but who is this? Is it a hired laborer? Is it is it again another community member who's, goes to shul but doesn't keep kosher? I don't know. It's sort of unclear who this is. Now, another way to try to gain clarity is to look in what's called the Targum. It's when we translate, this was the translation of the Torah into Aramaic around 200 BCE. This was because people spoke and read Aramaic. They didn't read Hebrew. So then they translate from the Aramaic back into English. So would someone read the Onkelos translation? Diane, you want to read this one?
If your brother becomes impoverished and his hand assets become shaky among you, you must support him. So too the proselyte, foreign resident, and the sojourner, so that he shall live with you.
Right. So here, like earlier, it was kind of suggested, well, you sort of treat them as if they were a sojourner or a proselyte. But here it's not just your brother. It's like if a proselyte or a sojourner, if these other people who are not as close to you, if they lose their job, you want to help them with their mortgage payment and tide them over so that they don't lose their house. So this is a much wider, a much bigger ask. It's sort of any community member. That person you see at synagogue who you say hi to every week, suddenly they're in some trouble. We need to give them some financial support. So from this view of the world, kind of where does it end? What is our level of obligation to kind of support people in the community? What are the pluses and minuses of these different viewpoints?
Not exactly unlimited, but on that continuum there, that's pretty generous.
Yeah.
It really doesn't refer to any limitations, does it? Not in this section anyway.
No, I mean, I guess it doesn't talk about a stranger. Like if just somebody shows up who you've never seen before and says, hey, I'm losing my house. Can you help me? That doesn't seem to be covered here, but it's giving us an opportunity to support a pretty wide section of our community.
So how do you distinguish that from the sojourner?
Can you clarify what you're asking?
I mean, is there when I think of sojourner, I'm thinking of like somebody who's doesn't have a permanent place of residence. How do we distinguish that from, like you were talking to, it might not apply to just somebody passing through that you have never met before. I guess I don't know the extent to which we are obligated to perform these kinds of acts. I'm kind of unclear, like you.
Well, maybe
to the point to which you were speaking. I don't see any.
The sojourners may be paying rent somewhere and it's kind of living there. I'm on a 6 month. I'm a traveling nurse. I'm on a 6-month contract.
Yes, some kind of connection. Okay.
Yeah. Whereas, I have a 2-year contract.
As far as Like this extending to anybody. Okay, yeah. But I don't see any reference to limitations, right?
There is not any, it doesn't say you must do it for these people and don't do it for these others. It's kind of silent on other categories.
Or time wise that you were speaking to. I'm not seeing.
Right. It doesn't say you give them 2 months to get back on their feet and then they're on their own. Dave, I see your hand.
I think back when these things were written, it took a long time to travel very far. Um, I don't know if it's true, but I remember a reference um, to the first century CE in which people were traveling as little as 70 miles and it would take 2 or 3 days. So it's not like now where somebody can pop in and out
Yeah.
in a day in a car. These people um, would be coming in slowly, usually,
Mhm.
and staying for some period of time, and probably be reluctant to just start off on another part of a journey. So a sojourner might be somebody who doesn't necessarily intend to stay for a long time, but is there for a while. And in reference to this verse, may in their stay with you or us experience some economic hardship, and because they're among us, we're obligated to support them.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, adjusting that to today um, is more difficult because we can have people come in from 1,000 miles away in a day and stay for a few hours. So
Yeah.
I think it's enough that we look at this because we're certainly not even in the Grand Valley. We're not even supporting the sojourners and the foreign residents here adequately, let alone getting to the point of worrying about somebody who comes in for a very short period of time, that is, they're visiting, and then helping them. So, although I think we need to consider whether if there's a visitor who comes in from somewhere else for a short time and is in dire straits, what kind of support do we give them? I volunteered at Catholic Outreach for over 10 years, and I know that we were trying when we could to give travelers who didn't have enough money for gas enough a gas voucher so they could have enough to go on the next part of their journey. So in effect, we were giving them the value of a tank of gas because we felt they had a need that we should fulfill, and often we didn't have enough money for that.
Mm.
Um, this is a very extensive verse. I'm not sure why the ger has to be someone who only fulfills the most important of the Ten Commandments, and that is that they assert that there's only one God. But that seems to be really important to this author, and uh, given that God has asserted that that's the absolute most important of the commandments, I don't know that we can extract that particular restriction out of the Torah. We have to interpret it as God thinks it's that important that we don't have an obligation to help people who believe in more than one God. Um,
Yeah,
but
you brought up something really important there, Dave, and I want to pull that out because we see like in the Midrash and Rashi claiming, supporting that, like it was up here. Um, this is a Ger Tzedek, a righteous convert, and the sojourner Toshav, this is a convert. That is totally added by the rabbis. that is an interpretation on top of the text. It could absolutely just be the permanent resident and the transitory resident of your community. This is the rabbinic agenda, which is that the religious status of people needs to be elevated, and we're going to make a big deal of that. And by extension, you're saying that if the person is a pagan, this does not apply. Like this is only for the Jews or the converts. And notice the convert is not a Jew, it's a convert. It's a different, they're treated differently. And then the Tosha, the sojourner, these are kind of, good enough, but they're not full converts. So that's a that's something they added that is not in the text. There's nothing in the text in the Torah itself which defines these in a religious way. And so when we're reading this commentary, we need to keep that in mind. Maybe we're on board with it, maybe we're not. More orthodox denominations would take this as canon. Like they would call this the oral Torah. This was also told to Moses at Mount Sinai. It's just as authoritative as the Torah. That's not something that I give heed to. I read this with respect, but I don't read it with the same authority that I would the Torah. That's why I call Torah study book club. We have our different interpretations, and we're in conversation with one another. Dave.
Was this written um, during the Babylonian exile?
No, this was probably written after. It's probably written in the Second Temple time
Okay, so
or later.
by the Babylonian exile and afterwards, there are quite a number of people who are not Jews who would have accepted that there's only one God.
Yeah,
The Zoroastrian religion clearly has only one God.
yeah,
And Jews were throughout the Jewish world, they were aware of that. So all
yeah.
of them would accept the first commandment.
Mhm.
Um, and so they would, if they were in your midst, they would be among those that you would have to help. Um,
Mhm.
they were also in the Babylonian exile. They were very aware of Buddhists and people of other Indian religions, Hinduism, etc. And there's all kinds of arguments about whether the Buddhists are or are not believers in God. There's a whole bunch of arguments about whether all those things that we call gods among Hinduism are really aspects of the one God, or do they have more than one God? So you could end up with a Talmudic ongoing discussion for 1,000 years of whether Hindus are monotheistic or polytheistic, and maybe a shorter and thinner discussion over a couple thousand years about whether Buddhists really believe in the universe and that that's their definition of God. So even these things that seem simple can end up becoming tortuous.
Right. And that's part of the danger of if you're putting a religious litmus test on who gives help, you can waste a lot of time deciding who passes and who doesn't, or you can give people who need help. There are people who are in the community. You could divide it a different way if it's um, uh, and maybe we'll get to that a little bit later. But um, getting back to kind of this Garen Utoshav. So here, this is one translation into Aramaic that says support your brother and the proselyte and sojourner. Here is a different Aramaic translation, which gives the exact opposite. If your brother becomes poor, strengthen, and thou shalt strengthen and do him good. As a guest and a sojourner, he shall be nourished with thee. So it's treat him as a guest and a sojourner. It's not don't also do this for the. So 2,000 years ago, they could not agree on what the Hebrew was asking us to do here. Somebody see the distinction between these two? Yeah, Dave.
To try to avoid an English problem here, the Hebrew brother would have included sisters, because when you have plural, you use the male if the group is mixed. But in English, if you say thy brother, it could be interpreted, say by evangelical Christians reading this, to mean you really only have to do this for men. That's not what this is saying.
Those are, I believe it is the singular. Um, yeah, achicha, that is a singular.
Of course, you have to help the brothers. Sisters are good at taking care of themselves. Brothers always need help.
Yeah. And you notice it's Aleph,
Touche,
Het,
Diane,
Yud,
touche.
Kaf. There's a Yud in Hebrew. Aramaic, Yuds become Vavs. So here it is Huch. That might look plural, but that's just the Aramaic singular because Yuds become Vavs in Aramaic. So yeah, no, it is men were the breadwinners. There's a very male-centric patriarchal society, and the language reflects that. Okay, so let's look at how Robert Alter, is anyone familiar with the Robert Alter translations? He wrote these. Oh shit, excuse me. I'm holding up this book and you can't see it because my camera's off. But Robert Alter wrote a great translation of the Bible. He's a modern biblical scholar at Berkeley. So, Marty, you want to read his translation here?
And should your brother come to ruin and his hand buckle under you, you shall hold him as sojourning settler, and he shall live under you.
He really looks at the grammar very carefully. So, his hand buckle under you, it's interesting. A lot of people point out that it's his hand. Usually it says someone's foot buckles, like in a psalm, I'm walking and I stumble, or my foot stumbles and God holds me up. So here it's an interesting construction. It is the hand. But what is Alter's take on the translation? Are we to take in the settlers, or are we to treat someone as a sojourner? What does he mean by you shall hold him as a sojourning settler, and he shall live under you?
In his notes to 35, he says, that is, he shall live under your authority or power, with the understanding that you shall take reasonable steps to allow him to subsist.
Yeah, it's almost like you make him a servant. You make him your servant. It's like, yeah, you give him, it's not the blank check, it's you take them in and you give them a job basically, and they can be a servant on your, and we'll look after your sheep so that they can not be impoverished. So this is kind of a different take. One is kind of the general, hey, don't let him stumble so far that he can't get up again and just really stabilize them, lend them money for a couple mortgage payments. Then there's two, and then, and help out like people who aren't your brother in a similar way. And then here we have the other, almost the other extreme, which is make them your servant as a way to help them avoid poverty, um, which is a little different look. Okay, so I can't tell if that silence is puzzlement, is agreement, is
No.
admiration.
Well, and I was looking in my commentary. It goes on to verse 36, where it's talking about it's the Akiva ruling that upon which is based on this section. That story that if there's two men sitting on a desert island and they only have enough water for one of them, that it's
Uh-huh.
okay for one person to drink it all because he doesn't have to sacrifice his life.
Yeah.
Uh, which which is based on that deontological approach where you have the rules and here you follow them, but it would be based on them thinking they knew the future, that there would definitely be no water forthcoming, no rescue
Mm.
forthcoming, no rain forthcoming, and that there was no other choice.
Mm.
This is interesting, particularly to me. Um, my father was a prisoner of war during World War II in a Japanese prison camp, and
Mm.
they had a very strong, I don't know if not a rule, but a culture
Ethos.
among them that whatever they had, they shared, even if a man was dying. They did not, it wasn't like an emergency room triage where it separated the dying from those that could survive. Um, like my dad, in one book that he was written about him, it was the idea that if you didn't, you were kind of giving up on any kind of rescue, you were giving up
Mm.
on the future, you were giving up on somebody, and that was just unacceptable. So that's kind of different, a different take on than
Thank you for sharing that. That is really interesting.
uh,
Um,
there's a very interesting book called The Barbed Wire Surgeon that documents a lot of my father's experience and other folks' experience who were captured and on the Bataan Death March and then were later imprisoned. But there's a lot of people who didn't previously have faith. Their faith emerged during those terrible times, and it's interesting to me that even though the majority of the prisoners were Christian, that so much of the Old Testament adages were what really helped them to survive.
mm.
Um, and it was interesting, according to my dad, how many of the Jewish prisoners were labeled rabbis,
Huh.
even though that of course they weren't. Um, but this idea of if somebody else was in need, that they really embraced the idea there was no limit. There was no limit on time. There was no limit on resources. You were obligated to share, and that's all there was to it.
Yeah.
Seems to be rooted in a little bit of this section to me.
Yeah. And maybe this kind of next reading sort of gets into that a little bit.
Hmm.
There was a in one of my books, it made reference to some comments by Abarbanel, and it was just like a little capsule summary of a sentence or two. So I looked it up and it was only in Hebrew. So I tried Google Translate and it isn't too bad. Um, so he's putting it into context. This is after talking about the Shemitah and the Jubilee and the redemption of the estates. And we touched on this. It's the land all belongs to God. People are not enslaved forever. And so he's saying this whole context, these are ways that the poor and their need are taken care of. Um, and he warned that even more, if a person is cut off and loses property and their estate, they have nothing to support themselves because his hand is cut off. So, someone want to read the bold here?
He will descend from his lowly position and be with you in your city, so that the poor of your city will be first. Do not abandon him or forsake him, but hold him fast, whether he is a Jew or a foreigner who has converted from another nation, or a resident who has taken upon himself the 7 commandments of the sons of Noah. Therefore, since he is with you, do not abandon him, but let him live with you, and with your help he will live and not die. And let him be the one to whom you lend your property, and do charity for him from your wealth. And when you lend him a loan of anything, do not take from him a bit of or a bite or a interest.
Great, thank you. So, the summary of this that was in the book that interested me was you want to help the poor in your city first before you help the poor in other cities. Um, so what do people think about that idea, or does something else from this commentary? He was a medieval commentator. Um, so that was the time, and there was a lot of poverty, and there were some people who were more well off than others in the ghettos. But what do you take from this? You agree, disagree?
Kind of reminds me of the adage when you get on an airplane to put your mask on first before
Mm,
you help the others, or you won't be able to.
uh-huh.
Maybe strengthening your own community is essential to you being able to reach
Yeah,
out and help others.
yeah, like that. Marty, you look
I'm just
contemplative.
guessing here because I've never heard of this before.
Is it suggesting that any kind of interest at all is frowned upon because if whatever it's passive or you already have enough, so it's not a good thing to charge someone in that case to increase your own wealth.
Yeah, it
I,
is.
I think the
Well, how,
restriction is on loaning money to the poor.
It would be exploitative, whatever that is. You'd be exploiting them and their circumstances for your own gain.
there is a lot. We'll look at a couple things about interest in a second. Yeah, because that was the next thing. They talked about two different types of interest actually in the next section. And um, well, let's just go take a look at that. Um, do not extract advance or accrued interest. Okay, so Rashi's interpretation from the Talmud is that these are basically two words for the same thing. So they're just doubling up so that if you break this, you're transgressing two commandments. So they're really trying to emphasize it. So, okay, that's an interesting take. Um, Nachmanides, Rashi's grandson, he says, well, Rashi says it's two commandments. He loves to contradict Rashi. This is Rashi's, but the plain meaning of the verse appears to me to be that interest is where you lend 100 shekels and the borrower has to give him 5 shekels each year. Interest without deducting it from the capital sum. So it is called neshech, biting, because at the last, it's like the bite of a snake. So it's kind of compound, almost like compound interest, which just keeps biting you. And then if you lend them a certain amount of money and you have to repay them, I'll lend you five and you have to repay me six in a year. It's not like a annual form of interest. So it's saying um, don't give either one of these. So money is usually lent with interest, but food is lent until the time of the reaping, and he pays him back out of his granary with a stipulated addition. So I'll give you a sack of grain, and you give me back a sack and a quarter of grain. So that's an interesting distinction. Neither one is okay, especially if you're trying to help out someone who's destitute. It's not like I'm trying to borrow money to start a business. I'm trying to borrow so I don't starve to death or so I don't lose my home. So Sforno, 16th century Italian kind of mystical and ethicist, he's just like, this is ethical conduct. This is you're helping someone out, you help them out, you don't try to take advantage of them, as someone said. Someone read the second one, Sforno on Leviticus, this one here.
You are required to do this if the Lord has endowed you so that you are financially able to extend such loans. The word imach,
Yeah.
alongside you, teaches what our sages termed your own life takes precedence over that of your fellow.
So what's the point he's making here? It's almost the opposite of the prison camp rule that Anita was talking about.
The idea that you have to have the means to help someone else before you're obligated,
Yeah.
and that you don't sacrifice your life, or I guess that of your family. I'm extrapolating that
Yeah.
in favor of someone else.
Yeah. Yes, you don't want to lose your own home helping someone else keep their home.
And determining that then becomes the tricky part, right?
Right.
When you decide you have enough to survive before you're obligated to help someone else.
Yeah, I mean, between my boat payments and the payments on my house in France, what am I supposed to do? Lose my boat? So let's see. This is from this is our last source. Basically they're saying a whole bunch of places in the Torah and in the Bible, which are all there's sort of this interesting take said, our rabbis, may their memory be blessed. They explained that if you're lending interest, you're not going to participate in the resurrection of the dead. Anyone who has the iniquity of interest in his hands will not have an angel intervene and teach merit on their behalf. And there's going to be no angel sort of looking out for you to kind of make sure you're taken care of. So there's a huge amount that's written about the problems of charging interest. But the resurrection of the dead, that was considered a really big deal. And to say that, well, you're not gonna get to take part in that if you've been lending with interest. That's interesting statement. And I always wonder when I read something like that, did they literally believe that the resurrection of the dead was going to happen, and because you were lending interest, you don't get to participate in that? Or was it, I don't know, was it a metaphor or was it something else? And that's very hard to know. So maybe just stopping, what are your takeaways from today, if anything?
Overall, there's a community, a liberal community concept going on where we're all in this together in hard times. And if you're in hard times, if someone has sufficient means, they should share it. I mean, that's the general concept here.
Mhm.
Makes me it makes me be thoughtful and question our current um, actions, policies, things we're doing now that do or do not reflect this. One thing that came to mind was the whole issue of the Colorado River water and who gets access
Hmm.
and who doesn't, and how you share that. I think of the plight of all the people seeking asylum here and trying to come here for a better life, or how we handle homelessness, or how we handle whatever, the inequity of our different school districts. I mean, there's so many different areas that you could apply this to. I wouldn't even know where to begin. It's kind of overwhelming to me.
Yeah.
But I think if it's a principle that we use to test different governmental policies or nonprofit policies or our personal choices, I think that can be pretty acidic about criticizing some of the stuff that is or isn't being done on each one of those levels. When, for example, Trump criticizes Europe for spending way too much money on supporting um, the people who live in their countries
So
and in
Dave, maybe
Europe as
we'll
a
try to
whole.
avoid like specific political positions, but
Well,
I hear you, but just
I
try
think
to,
that we need to make sure that we're treating everybody well.
yeah, yeah. No, I hear you. And one thing that resonated with me was this idea that um, make a priority of the poor in your own community or people in your own community. And like we always try to, if we are giving, when we're giving money to charity at the end of the year, we always look for like the local food bank instead of the national food bank. And we try to make sure that some of the money we're giving is local. Um, whether it's the three fish, which helps the poor out of the church we share space with, or it's out, it's Branch and Broomfield. But I think there's just something very powerful about that because these are people in our community. We see them, we live with them, um, and it would be nice to help them. Well, friends, thank you so much for being here. I think it is time for us to end for the week. We will have a Torah Saturday next week, and then I will be on vacation for 2 weeks, and we'll
Ooh,
Zoom after that.
are you doing anything special?